It seems safe to say at this point that the London attacks were another case of Islamic terrorism. And before the bodies are even cold, before the first person has even been discharged from hospital, the cliches are already out in force. People are changing their Facebook profiles. One side is blaming immigration, the other side is saying it's nothing to do with Islam and blaming anything but. And yet it keeps happening. These attacks continue to be Islamic in nature. They continue to come from Islamism. They continue to be inspired by Islamic terror groups around the world. And we continue to live in denial. It's ironic, I suppose, that this should happen so close to the death of Martin McGuinness. Like many Brits, I have grown up surrounded by the threats of bombings and terrorism. I don't think there's been a point in my life where this hasn't been the case, whether it was the IRA or whether it was Islamic terror. There was always a threat hanging over. If anything, things have gotten better since I was a kid. You know, you're allowed to take your bags into museums and things now, which you didn't used to be allowed to do, at least not without a search. But we're used to it. For all that Sadiq Khan has taken a great deal of flack for what he said, it is true that, at least for us, to live in a big city is to expect this kind of thing to happen from time to time. Now, I don't live in London. I live out in the home counties, amongst the Wax Jacket and Labrador Brigade. But I have spent a lot of time in London. I have a lot of friends in London. It has been almost a second home to me. And if you want to know Britain, if you want to know England, London is everything you need to know in microcosm, and the site of all the museums that tell our story and the statues and everything else. So for that to be attacked, especially at the heart of government, is something a little bit different. Now we need to find a way, a useful way, a meaningful way to actually attack these issues, these problems that we have. We need to acknowledge and name the problem. And I'm sorry to say, but the problem is Islamic ideology. We have been involved in wars in other nations. We have had foreign policies that have caused harm to other nations. But it is only the Islamic world that does this. It is only the Islamic world that is engaged in this asymmetrical warfare against civilian populations here in our homes. From amongst populations that we have taken in as citizens. Now, I'm not saying we should stop immigration, and I'm not blaming every Muslim for the actions of a few, but we do need to acknowledge that this is not a racial issue. This is an ideological issue. We need to acknowledge that Islam is not just a religion, but it is an ideology. And that these viewpoints are not only held by extremists. Check the polling data. There is such a strong undercurrent of, or even overcurrent, of homophobia, approval for terrorism, support for blasphemy laws, and so on. These are all ideological positions that are absolutely counter to Western, secular, liberal values. That, whether you're far left or far right, you subscribe to some of these. These are the things that make our societies free, that make them enviable, I suppose. These are the things that make us who we are. These are the things that make it possible for us to accept and to integrate others, whether you think that's a good thing or not. So when we compromise these values, when we fail to defend them, I think we only really have ourselves to blame at that point. And again, I have to emphasize that this is not a racial thing. This is an ideological and religious thing. We didn't shy away from combating the political evangelical right. We don't shy away from doing that today. When it comes to Christianity in America or in the UK, we treat these ideas with scorn. We treat the idea of a blasphemy law with scorn. But when it comes to Islam, for some reason, people get messed up in the head. I suppose it's because anti-immigration and anti-minority sentiment is so prevalent on the right, and because our institutions have become, if not left at least, more left, that any objection to any of this is seen as a casual admittance of right-wing sympathies or something. But I find it is my left-wing values, my liberal values, that lead me to look at the tenets and the beliefs and the actions of Islam and feel worry. It beggars belief to me that my fellow members on the left of the political spectrum all but refuse to criticize Islam, to look at it with a critical eye. And I can't help but wonder why. We haven't shied away from criticizing religion. The left-wing philosophy has often been anti-religion because religion presents the ultimate hierarchy. And left-wing values are very much against hierarchy and against absolute authority. So why the hell are we apologizing for Islam, which is not only one of these ultimate hierarchies, it's not just authoritarian, but is against all these values that we have spent 50 odd years fighting for? Gender equality, racial equality, freedom, removing constrictions on free expression. It's virulently homophobic, and it has to be said, violent. So why would the left ally itself with such a thing? Why would it hold back from presenting the kind of criticism that we have leveled for centuries against Christianity? What's so different about Islam? Is it just that it is mostly adhered to by racial minorities, and so we don't feel that we can attack it because that's racist somehow? But it isn't. Islam is an ideology. Your skin colour doesn't determine that you have to be Islamic. It just seems absurd. We have no problem criticising other religions. We have no problem criticising other ideologies. People are more than happy to punch someone out in the street for having a political opinion that they don't like, but turn that against a religious/political position you don't like, and somehow that changes. And no, I'm not saying punch anyone, I think that's wrong anyway. There's just this total moral confusion on the left when it comes to Islam, and into that void, into that vacuum, the right wing comes with their simplistic solutions, with their bigoted ideology that is often in its own way no better than the Islam that they're fighting. I keep saying this in regard to so many issues, but if we do not speak up, if we do not argue from an old school, rational left-wing position on these issues, then we're abdicating the whole argument to the right. And we've seen what happens then. Brexits, Trumps, all this kind of horrible shit that goes on. I believe in Western values, not whiteness. Western values. Secular, liberal, scientific, technological, genuinely progressive values. And I believe that they're superior. And I think that can be shown to be true. Have we stumbled and screwed up along the way? Certainly. Are we stumbling and screwing up now? Yes, in some ways we are. We have allowed our pursuit of wealth to screw things up. We have allowed our compassion to fall away. Two of the big things that were always really appealing, I think, about Western civilization to others was that level of freedom that we've had, and the fact that we did, at least to an extent, share that wealth. We built institutions that lifted everybody up. And both of these things have been eroded in recent years. All those facilities, those organizations that we built up and that we shared as a society have been chipped away at, sold off, to the point where even the NHS is under attack now. That sense of community is all but gone. And that freedom is also gone. That has rendered us vulnerable. We allow private companies to trample over our rights, and this has also allowed a backdoor for these religious bigots to enforce their will on others. You have Pakistan now pressuring Facebook to prevent blasphemy being posted on their platform. We see all kinds of ways, all these media platforms, these choke points of discussion and debate and interaction, they're all being controlled. Without free debate, how are you supposed to challenge these ideas? How is Islam supposed to reform and join the rest of us in the 21st century if it can't even be exposed to different ideas, to criticism, to mockery? And how can we appeal to people to move away from these older, and I'm going to say it, more primitive ways of thinking if we give up those values ourselves, those better values? We beat the Soviet Union in large part just because our society operated better, because it was obviously more free and more successful and more open. It was not a repressive society. So when it becomes a choice between two repressive societies, what then? If you give up the values that make you better, what then? I'm just tired of the cliches, and I wish people would actually try and tackle the issues, find solutions, rather than giving up the space to their own opposition and allowing the very worst voices to dominate the conversation.